lot of times I'll hear like master your mind. And when I hear that, I'm like, actually, I'm going to change that because I just want a better relationship. Because as soon as I try to master, I'm trying to force.
Control it.
Exactly. And it's not about control. It's about just, if I have a better relationship with you, we're in harmony.
Yep.
And there's no different inside of me. If I have a better relationship with myself, then it's going to be harmony. It's going to be fun. You know? And I won't be making myself wrong. But when I'm trying to master somebody, I'm trying to break them. I don't want to break myself. And so I'm looking at through a new lens, using a new word, and seeing how that feels. And it feels so much better to fit into.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. In this episode, I had the great honor of welcoming Marc Laws II to the podcast. Marc is a renowned yoga teacher and former professional soccer player. Outside of that, he's a devoted husband and father. From his early days in the United States, Marc's fascination for the game of soccer took root, eventually leading him towards a career as a professional soccer player during his early 20s. Through this journey, he channeled his passion for the game to unlock the hidden potentials of his own mind and body. Fueled by his curiosity for life, soccer became Marc's gateway to unraveling life's deeper lessons, whether it was mastering discipline, navigating competition, or excelling in high-pressure situations. Soccer offered him a platform for personal growth and self-discovery. Marc's explorations eventually continued beyond the boundaries of the soccer field, leading him into the fields of human behavior, psychology, and sports therapy. When he discovered yoga, it became clear that a new chapter of his life was wanting to emerge. In his own words, he says, "Yoga had it all, the philosophy, an approach to life, and the awareness of my mind and self." Since then, he's not looked back. Marc and I connected early on in my own journey in Bali after I attended one of his local yoga classes, and he's become a dear friend since. As we came into this interview, Marc had just come out of an extended period with his father, who visited Bali to meet his grandson, Sage, for the very first time. And it was this unique coming together that provided an extraordinary point of focus for our own conversation, an opportunity to delve into the dynamics of three generations: father, son, and grandson. Together we explore the transition from boyhood to manhood, the role of fatherhood, and finding the path of forgiveness for the wounds we may inherit from our own fathers. This conversation is filled with heartfelt stories and examples out of our own personal lives, creating a truly special episode that I'm incredibly excited to share with all of you. Mr. Laws, welcome to the Heart of Man podcast.
Thank you, Alex.
How are you doing today?
Pretty good, man.
Felt really excited for this conversation. I heard that you were freshly out of a trip to Australia and as well to a magical place called Sumba. And really curious to see where we kind of take this conversation today. We first got introduced to each other when I got to know you in the local yoga classes, and something like even though we didn't really connect much at the beginning, I initially felt like, okay, I feel like I can vibe with this guy, and it was beautiful to see how we connected with each other over a longer period of time afterwards.
Yeah.
But the thing I really want to get into with you today, as well with the title of the podcast, is ultimately men's work, but then as well talking about what it's like to be a man today in our society. And I know you as well are a father, and you had your father here for a month just very recently. And this is something really interesting for me that I want to get into, just considering as well, what may have come up in the process, and then as well just to weave in your own personal story with all these conversations and this topic. So yeah, man, super excited for us to dive in.
Yeah, likewise. Let's explore. Might surprise myself.
Yeah, absolutely. But before we dive into any of that, perhaps you can just share with our listeners who you are, perhaps in a 60-second elevator speech, who Marc Laws is, and ultimately for the audience, and what you do here.
Yeah, well, what I do here. I live in Bali now, and before that I lived in London, and I was born in England and raised in a place called New Mexico in the United States, from a Canadian mother and Canadian Ukraine, and a father with African descent, like slave ancestry. And from football to sports medicine to eventually yoga was kind of my vessels of, I guess, expressing myself to where I am now, which is mainly the arts of yoga and what is it to be a human being in today's world, and using ancient techniques of, like, I guess they kind of made a manuscript of just like, what is it to be human, and what is our potential, and what are we connected to? What's the layers of self? And well, that's where we met, being a yoga teacher and catching the vibes, and then you and I just grew from there. And so I'd say in a nutshell, those are my expressions of late.
Yeah,
that's Marc for now.
Yeah. Thank you, brother. And
Yeah.
like I said, I would definitely love to as well see how we can weave that in as we go through the discussion, and definitely as well very intrigued to hear how your experiences working as a professional soccer player as well weaved in, and as well then your transition into yoga. So I'll definitely put that in the sidebar to kind of pick up later.
Yeah, sure.
But first of all, I would maybe just love to dive in and just hear, what was it like for you to have your dad here for a month in Bali? I recognize as well that this was the first time he met your son, Sage.
Yeah.
So I'm really intrigued to hear what that was like for you.
So my son, Sage, for those that know, he's 3 years old now, and he was born the month after lockdown. So we had Nepi here in Bali, and the day after we all went in lockdown, and that was that. So yeah, my dad came the month before his birthday, so finally got to meet his grandson, his first grandson, and that would mean I haven't seen my dad for over 4 years in person. And in our relationship, especially with actually the majority of all the men in my family, because it's all brothers. My mom and dad had 3 kids, including me, so biologically, and then they adopted 5, all boys as well.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And so it was always all men. But my mom's one of the most powerful powers in the house, the energy.
That she kind of had to with all these men.
Even before that,
yeah,
it was her upbringing. She went through she had to grow up fast, really fast. There was some challenges within her family dynamic where she just had to be really strong. She really had to tap into her masculine energy and be there for her family before us and herself to almost survive emotionally. And my dad, so like our communication, men amongst men, is like very rare, but we feel we don't need it. Like I was just checking with my brother, be like, hey, how's our relationship? Out of 10. Because I haven't spoken to him in over a year, like literally. He's like, it's a 9 out of 10. I was like, wow, man. I was actually surprised because I thought it might be a little lower coming from him.
Sure.
But he's like, no, it'd be nice to see you, but like, we're solid. I was like, yeah, we are solid. And that's how we all are. We'll speak like every once in a while, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, period, on the phone or whatever. And then we'll see each other. And it's like, we're more of like, be in the physical and then let's go deep.
Right.
So my dad's made his way over here, finally retired at the age of 71. Because at the age of 18, he was in college studying criminology. And then the president at that time was doing one last draft to send people to war. And my dad just happened to be one of those last people. He just pulled out of college. Can you imagine? Just like you're doing your own thing, living out your dreams, and someone's just like, I want you to go die for your country or fight for your country, right? And hopefully you survive. And so he was just yanked out. And he just kind of went with the flow. Like now he's suddenly in the military. And by the time he was finished with his first year or second, he was like think he had some advice of just like, you can take this further and just make this a career instead. So it almost tied into to his criminology studies, because eventually there was a opportunity to mix his military career with police work. And that's why, well, eventually we moved from, so when he got to California, it was like either go to Japan or New Mexico. And they stationed him in New Mexico. And he's just like, what the hell? What is this New Mexico place? He hasn't left since. And so it took, his love is not "I love you" in touch, right? Which was a challenge for me as a child, because my love language is touch and affirmation, maybe even gifts. I like those. But so he didn't offer that. So as a child, I was like, man, does he really love me? Like, he shows his disappointment, but I barely hear much of a love, right? So, which is interesting, because now that I'm saying this out loud, it was expressed what I felt like was disappointment. At least that's how I was hearing it, or not good enough through words. So then there was never words to match that in the opposite way, but it was action, because he was always there and he provided everything. So it was the provider and just a rock. Yeah. And that was his love language.
That's really interesting, right? Because hearing that, I can very much relate to that as well with my own relationship to my father. And very similar to you, the languages that I really deeply speak to are touch and affirmations. Got very little from that, based on the background of my own dad, who grew up in Russia, and it was a really rough time growing up in poverty. And like, his way of expressing love was being a provider. Really, like, just making sure that all the needs that he didn't have as a child were ultimately met through me, right? But then, like, there was a time where he never understood, like, my dissatisfaction to a certain degree that I experienced. But then eventually, over time, putting myself in positions where I really put myself in his shoes, I came to understand the way he was loving me. It was maybe, as you said, not the way that little boy in me wanted to be loved, but at the same time, it was love, right? And then I noticed that there was a narrative that was just created that he doesn't love me, right?
Absolutely.
Super interesting.
Complete reflection.
Yeah.
And it was like, the moment my consciousness grew enough to notice that there was different spectrums of how to share and show and express love, then I was free, completely free, you know? And it came through different avenues of things that I explored, from spiritual works, or, even plant medicine, where it's just like, it really rained it home over and over again until it became embodied. And, which is funny, because now we're talking about his visit, and it doesn't mean there's not residue that's still there. Because, after us just expressing like, oh, okay, there's different ways to express it. And in fact, they were solid in their love. And when he came to visit, I was so excited, obviously, to see him. I haven't seen him in a long time. He's finally retired, so I'm so curious on who is this man, and what are his dreams, because he's given us everything. 18 to 71. That was all wild. For family.
Fuck.
And he still doesn't stop. Like, as I learned more about him, I was like, because we talked about that. We sat down. I was just like, let's go for brunch. Let me take you out. And something told me to go grab some cards off the bookshelf, because I like to pull cards, particularly from Kim Krans, her specifically. I love her journey, and I love the cards that she creates. And these ones I just got because I asked him to bring them for me, and they're all around alchemy. Like, what is alchemy, and the power of alchemy, from turning lead to gold to transforming oneself to the fountain of youth. So there's always been this element of alchemy that was popular, and she put it through these cards. So I brought them. We went for brunch, and it's really not his thing, but he called me. We sat down and we ate, and we're just talking a little bit about dreams and what he's up to. I was like, what's it feel like to be retired? Like, what are you doing with your life now? And he's like, well, I don't know. It's like, because my mom will be like, he just watches TV all day and gets on the computer. He hasn't done much. And I was like, well, he has been working for a very long time,
Sure.
So maybe he needs that chance just to unwind and just do those things until eventually, I've seen it over here in Bali. Like, so many people like make their riches, or they just like time to get away, and they're here for a year or two, just sipping coconuts every day, not doing much. And eventually they're just like, I need some purpose.
Yep.
I need something to do.
Yep.
Your soul's like, let's move, let's do something. We got to express. And then it just happens almost naturally. I was like, now he needs his space. from
Right.
18 to 70,
Yeah.
nonstop work.
This is really interesting, right?
Right.
Because to a certain degree, I mean, my story is that the cultural context is that, you know, we see that narrative of him maybe needing to unwind, or like giving ourselves that time to unwind until a new purpose perhaps arises. We criticize that, or we make that wrong, or we say, like, we shouldn't do that way, right? But then I wonder, hearing that, how much of it actually is required so something new can really emerge, you know? But if we don't really give ourselves that space, you know, we're just rushing into the next thing, not recognizing it may be not really the most truthful expression of what wants to come through, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. It's like, and I've seen it over and over again with people.
Yep.
You know, whether they do push, it still arrives, or if they just chill, you know? But a lot of people are uncomfortable with the void. You know, and it is a dance, an individual dance for all of us, of knowing when to just sit back and allow the void to just be and be okay in it, just like in nature. Like, everything comes from the void. But if we're not willing to be in the void, then how can anything come from it? When we're just filling the cup all the time, it's just like there's no space for new creation. And so he was in that point because he had no choice. Now he's retired.
Yep.
You know, after all of those years of work, it's just like, who are you? What do you identify with now?
Right.
And so that's what it was all about. And so we sat down and we had brunch, and I was like, Dad, you want to pull some cards? He's like, what are these cards? We did a lot of interesting things, man. And 'cause he's so willing just like to come into my world.
Yeah,
which is,
I love that.
Which is another love language, right? He's just like, he's always saying yes. Just like, hey, Dad, this is my world. You want to come? And he's just like, yeah, why not?
It's great.
That's how he gets to know me, right? But he's like,
Sure.
He's not here gifted with the words of elegance, but his way of being is the most elegant and profound and graceful and powerful thing that I've ever seen. His presence is fantastic. And so we pulled the cards, and we realized that he does have this huge love for like photography, which he hasn't done in a long time. And his priority is always family. It's like number one at top, family. Then maybe some like photography and travel was in there as well. So like we were bubbling all these things up, you know, like we have all these tools, like, you know, I'm speaking about you and I and other people that are like into the work of like creating spaces for people for self-discovery, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times in these retreats and these containers, people are sharing so much with strangers that become so close. They all just in an instant. You see it within hours, right? When people start to share authentically. And then they're so charged. And most of these things are around our families. But then we don't practice these same tools within our family unit.
Exactly.
Which is where they need to be.
Yeah.
But at least that's a step towards it. You know, where we can sit down and just have these amazing conversations that we once had with a stranger, with the person that we were actually speaking about or having the challenge with, which is the core of everything. The core of our freedom starts with, well, pretty much from birth and I guess sometimes before and after, which is a bit more complex, but there are things that are right in front of us, which is how solid and clear is our relationships with the people we were born into.
How was it? I'm curious if I can just jump in for a moment.
Jump in, man.
I'm wondering, how was it for you? Because you mentioned that there was some residue as well left for you when your dad came. And I'm wondering, did you notice as well some of that resistance come up for you to really connect in that way? As you described, you know, people would in these containers. And if so, how did you navigate that?
Well, I guess I was practicing those tools with my father here by pulling out the cards, and he asked me about yoga, so we stared doing yoga together most mornings. It was profound, bro.
Yeah.
Because he came to me, he's like, so what's this yoga thing? You know? I was like, all right, Dad, let's go do some. And we did like 5 to 10 minutes, and he was rinsed.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, to see my dad from like back in the day, like this tremendous bodybuilding athlete, like fast man. He was a track runner as well, to being like looking like 70s. You know, what can that look like? Here's one spectrum, and then here's another spectrum after the yoga. So as he tasted the yoga, he was so moved by it. Like one day he came into the living room, and I was like, Dad, are you all right, man? You're sweating your ass off. He's like, yeah, I just went on YouTube, and I found myself a yoga video, and I just did 40 minutes.
Fuck yeah.
I was like, damn. And
nice.
It's a testament to the yoga, or to these practices of just like, he felt something within him that felt so good and alive that he's like, I'm going to go do this on my own. Right? And I was just like, wow, at the age of 71 and still getting it, you know?
I love it.
And so the residue that I was talking about was, there was moments where sometimes like I would realize, like putting myself in somebody else's shoes. Like my dad's just arrived, and yes, I'm his son and he's my father, but also he's in a new space. It's not his house. He's never spent time with Sage, so it's like, how do you be? And and so he's sitting in this place of just like maybe discomfort. I never asked, right? But he's like, we go into, or at least he went into his usual, just like pulling out his screen, right? Because that's a comfortable place.
Yeah.
And just watching things.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a safe space.
Yeah. And so I'm just like, for me, it's like for Sage, there's certain times maybe he can watch things, but also like my dad is sitting right next to him and he's watching and he's come here to like see him. And I felt like inside of me, I was like, Dad, can you maybe turn that down? Or like, I couldn't speak clearly from the heart because there was this little boy inside still to just be like, well, he won't listen to me, or I don't want to make him upset. Or so all these things, all this old running was still available. And I was watching it as I spoke those first words. And I was just like, what the fuck? Are you for real? I was like, Dad, I'm 41 right now. My dad's 71 right now. And I'm feeling this child. Like, I'm not you anymore. Come on, man. This is man to man. Let's have a chat. Let's be real. And so it took a moment. It probably took a day or two before I was just like, speaking differently, just expressing, but not making anybody wrong, because I can understand like where he might be coming from, right? And so I left that space, but just expressed like, you know, maybe Sage doesn't watch things at a certain time, and sometimes it's not fair to see someone else, but he can't. And then also like, you guys can play, and then maybe in another day or two, everything just switched, and then they were relating on a big way, but also it's like, there was that, maybe the words, and noticing what was happening, the way I was expressing myself through that lens of still that little boy, and then catching it. So it was the way I was listening, right? That some call it like the already listening, right? So as you and I speak, we can still hear our inner voice. And so that becomes a lens. So as we speak to someone or behave towards somebody, we're doing it through that lens of how we're here. And by the way we hear is the way we see them. Right. So if we can clear that, then we can actually see them for who they actually are and who they're not. Right. And then it's a whole nother experience because we're really being with them and hearing them. And so that was slowly arriving for me with my father, just like, you know, what's he really saying? Not what I'm making it because of this old childhood stuff that just needed to be cleared. Right. And it was just so wonderful. Like the relationships got richer and richer and richer every day that he was here. And I remember like it was coming up to the last few days, and I was like, "Oh, Dad, man!" I was like, "You should have stayed for 3 months." It's like, "Yeah, but you know, I didn't want to be a nuisance." And I was just like, "Oh no. Let's just get rid of that right now. You will never ever be a nuisance to your family. You've given everything, and I love you so much. The more, the better, right? Just make that clear." Because I remember a long time ago, before my grandmother died, his mother said that to me about her sons. I was like, you gave them everything. And you feel like you can't ask them for help? Because now she was living alone, and she wasn't doing very well with like diabetes and cancer. She had stage 4 cancer as well. And she just couldn't come to ask. Not even from my father, who never knew. So during that trip, like I was sharing things that his mother shared with me that she never shared with him.
Wow.
And I was just like watching his reaction, but also just like when I was receiving that as a young cat, I was just like she trusted him more than anybody, because her other 2 sons, unfortunately, like stole money from her during hard times, and they were supposed to be like taking care of her accounts. And she just had so much love and appreciation for my dad, and as well as trust. Like if there's anybody she wanted in her corner, it was him, but she never asked, right? And she never told him how much that he meant to her. So he was like, here's this, whoever, what he's going through, and his little boy, and being a man and a father and a grandfather. Yeah. I have no idea, right? So I was like, I have to share this with him, because he's repeating words that his mother said to me.
Right.
And I was like, I don't want you to feel that way.
This is super powerful, you know, and what I imagine as well held her back, really from speaking out loud was, she was getting caught in the loops of these stories that, you were as well referring to were coming up for you in that moment, with your dad and your son, right? And this is really powerful, just the way you described how you navigated that situation, because what I'm hearing is that you did have the awareness when that story arose, when it came up, but you didn't react from that place, or at least you were able to check yourself and, I imagine, sit with yourself ultimately. And when you were able to then communicate with your dad, it was coming from a different place, right? So I wonder if those stories that we may have, he won't listen to me, I don't want to be a bother, things like that. I wonder if they ever go away, but rather maybe it's not even about that. Maybe it's more about bringing awareness to those, tending to those parts of us, and at the same time deciding to, I guess, act from a different place, from a more sober place.
Yeah, I through my education around that specific type of work, it supposedly doesn't go away, right? I don't know. I'll let you know. As I work through this, because it's a whole nother realm and a whole nother world. Because a lot of my friends will say, "Mark, you're such a great listener," and then after doing work myself on communication, which is really all about listening and the inner listening, I realize I have a lot of work to do, and based on the education is that it's always happening, but it's just a matter of like taking a moment to pause if it's happening in real time, noticing it, and then choosing something different, which is the practice over and over again. But it's that inner communication is the very foundation of our reality. So most likely it will be with us because it's always been with us, right? And perhaps maybe we'll find out over practice. Perhaps something else will be available.
Sure.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. I mean, what I can tell you definitely from my own experiences is that it seems like I'm not as attached to what these stories may say, and I still hear them in the background, and I can tend to them at times when it's required, but I don't need to grasp onto them as strongly, which allows me, I guess, the ability to make different choices. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes it's sneaky. Like,
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. Like, there'll be moments things come out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh man, that came from my listening. And then I have to either backtrack if it's available and just be like, hey, this is what was happening for me, and it was coming from here. I want to create a new possibility, because in the end, what matters most is clarity and this love and affinity. Like, if it's not there, then I know that there's something that's like, we could tell in all relationships if something's not quite clear, because we can't be fully in love and affinity with somebody because there's something, a listening that's in a way, right? And so it becomes very interesting, I think, a very interesting dance of taking full responsibility of that as an individual and not blaming the other person, which is an incredible practice.
Yeah.
Right? To be able to speak somebody from there. I guess what it would look like is like if I was to go to my father and be like, tell him like, hey, Dad, I know like you never told me you love me, and I know it was really hard for you to express that to me, and I didn't feel loved. Like that right there is like I'm listening in a certain way, and then it's almost like I'm blaming him. Versus I can say instead that this is the way I'm hearing, like through this hearing of just like, I didn't realize that your love is always there. And thank you so much for, being there and providing. And and that then the possibility of just like, I love you and I just want to, that's what matters to me most. So let's just, and then we create a possibility together. Just like either we be in touch more if that's what we want, or, any kind of possibility that's there for both of us.
Yeah.
And it's been an interesting practice, because I just did do a course around this 2 weeks ago, and so there's a lot of relationships that I just had to make some phone calls. Like for one of the most profound ones for me so far is my grandfather, and I think there's a transition of manhood happening right now. Like back in the day, for maybe our fathers and before their fathers was, you don't share all of your emotions. In fact, that's weak.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a moment that it dawned on me. I was just like, geez, what's more weak is hiding. And then I was just like, I can't hide, and that this is what's going to be different for us, as men. It's like, we're not going to hide ourselves. We're not going to hide our emotion. We're going to be fully self-expressed. And I feel that's more powerful because that's courageous to share from authenticity. Yeah. And there was a moment, like my grandfather, like he would keep it to himself because that's the way they were nurtured to do. And he went through a challenging time by losing his wife. She passed away way earlier than he was expecting, because I think they had like a nice age gap where he's just like, I'm definitely leaving first. And she just brought vibrancy to their relationship and to his life, and he felt young, and they just had a great time. And it wasn't supposed to be that way. And she passed away earlier, just something suddenly came up and then deteriorated within months. And so he was going through a challenging time, obviously, and decided that he felt a little bit alone, so he's going to move himself into a house, even though his daughters were like, no, we'll get a house across the street, and then we can. It's like, I don't want that. I just want to live in this place. And he moves there. And so I think it was a few months later, I called him up. So I was like, how's my grandfather? Like, after all this, I gave a little bit of space, and this is my inner listen again. Just give him some space and just let that thing happen. I call him up, and then I was like, hello? He's like, hey, who is this? It's like, it's Mark. He's like, Mark who? It's like, it's your grandson. It's like, oh, listen, I'm busy. I'm just getting ready. I was like, all right, should I call you back? And he's like, you do what you want. And he hangs up the phone. It's like, all right, something's going on here. All right, and now the stories are already turning. Yeah, I don't ask him, but the stories are turning. And I was like, I'll call him back in an hour. I hit him up in an hour. Same thing. And he's just like, I'm eating breakfast, and just hangs up. And I was like, man, he must be, there's something going on, like either between us or he's angry at me or something. I don't know. And so my mind's drumming up, like, what could he be angry about? And then I just let it be. I'll give him some space, right? Because of this, what's turning. So it must have been a few months later, Sage is born, his first great-grandson. And so I go on Facebook, and I drop him some video messages, like, here's your great-grandson, Sage, and send loads of pictures throughout, like, the weeks and maybe a few months. And then I could see that he's been looking at it, but never replied once. And I was like, wow, okay, maybe he is angry at me. More space. So I let that space happen. 2.5 years later, I go through this course. His name comes up on my list. I'm like, all right, let me hit him up. Let me see how I'm listening. Hello? Hey, who's that? He's like, it's Mark. Mark who? It's like, your grandson. It's like, huh? Oh my gosh, Mark, I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. And I'm like, ashamed about what? I didn't recognize your voice. I'm so sorry. And he's like, literally in shame. I was like, you don't have to be ashamed. It's like, it's so cool. It's like, how you doing? Oh my gosh, I'm just so overwhelmed right now. It's like, are you all right? He's like, it's just so nice to speak to you. I'm just so overwhelmed with emotion. I'm just like, God, me too. And in that moment, I was just like, all this, the way I was listening was just like, he needed space, but in fact, he needed the opposite, you know? And I was making it about me, of just like, he must be angry at me. But the fact was that all he did was just say those words and then hang up. It didn't mean anything else.
Right.
I made up the rest of the meanings
Yep.
that eventually made my reaction. And now I'm here 2.5 years later, and we're speaking. He's overwhelmed. I'm overwhelmed. I'm almost in tears. And he's just like, yeah, he's like, it's been challenging, you know, like dementia's starting to set in, you know, over the past few months. And he's like, so all these things of just like that I could have brought up and like, not made him wrong, but just like in a way it does indirectly, of just like, oh, you hung up on me, and you never replied to any of my Facebook messages or anything like that. And I was like, what mattered most was none of that. It was like, oh, we're connected, and our love and affinity is replaced easily. And I was like, I did ask him, I was like, oh, did you see all those videos and pictures I sent you on Facebook? He's like, you sent me stuff on Facebook? There's no recollection. I was like, yeah, I've Sage. She's like, oh my gosh. She's like, I would love to see it. I was like, listen, I know Auntie Pat, his daughter, she's coming to see you. I'll send everything to her, and you guys can look at it together. It's like, oh my gosh, that'd be so wonderful. Can you do that? In fact, I can't wait. As soon as I get off this phone, I'm going to call her up and just tell her I got to speak to you. And I was like, oh my gosh. He's about to turn 90. And if it wasn't for, honestly, that course, I don't know when I would have called him.
Fuck, man.
Do you know what I mean? And all of that, he wanted to hear from me. He's always wanted it. But I made it mean like he needed space because he hung up on me.
Wow, man.
When he just hung up.
Right.
It wasn't on me. He just hung up. I don't know what he was going through.
Man, thanks for sharing this incredible story. You know, I feel like it's such a prime example for the challenges that happen in relationship, specifically when something happens, somebody says something, and then we create a meaning out of it. But also, to a certain degree, the meaning that we create from my own experiences, we take it personal to a certain degree. And that is perhaps because we want to protect ourselves in that moment. We want to, maybe not overstep ourselves with another, but then we do create this connection, whilst at the same time, as you said, all he wanted was connection.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right. Like, I was smiling as soon as you said the word protection, because that's one of the indications when we're defensive or having to try to convince somebody that we already know we're listening in a certain way. That's the trigger. It's like, but why are you protecting yourself from words? What is it? What's being triggered right now? And then this work starts to happen. I'm just like, I think like I'm going through this paradigm shift of these words of just like, a lot of times I'll hear like master your mind. And when I hear that, I'm like, actually, I want to change that because I just want a better relationship. Because as soon as I try to master, I'm trying to force.
Control it.
Exactly. And it's not about control. It's about just, if I have a better relationship with you, we're in harmony.
Yep.
And there's no different inside of me. If I have a better relationship with myself, then it's going to be harmony. Yep. It's going to be fun. You know? And I won't be making myself wrong. But when I'm trying to master somebody, I'm trying to break them. I don't want to break myself. And so I'm looking at through a new lens, using a new word, and seeing how that feels. And it feels so much better to fit into, and I'll see how it evolves.
Yep.
But it's like, for me, it's like, it's also part of like, of being a man, like to be able to have, like we were talking about earlier, this paradigm of just being in a new state of courage, or just redefining courage. Because back in the day, it was like, hold your feelings, don't cry. And that's what was supplied to me and conditioned. It was like, men don't cry. Or my uncles and my dad's side of the family, we don't hug or kiss, we shake hands. And so it's like seeing that, and then also like, I'd like to express it differently. I like to touch. I like to express. I like just to be freely expressed. And then I feel like I step more into my manhood.
Yep.
Being a man, and then I could relate. And I feel like I was very lucky. For some reason, this story is just popping up in my head of just the power of having groups of men. Where I grew up with that. I played soccer my entire life.
Right.
So I always had that. And I remember I was at this festival. It was a Neo-Tantra festival in Ibiza, and it was profound. And the second day of the festival, they separate all men from women, and we're doing our own thing all day. And as we're doing our exercises, Oaxaca, is that his?
The Haka,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. He's teaching us this as men. I think there was like, I want to say 150 to 200 guys.
Wow.
Imagine that in this huge marquee.
Insane.
And
wow.
the guys up there teaching us, just individual, and we're all going through the motions. And it's like, and he's like, the energy that's coming from it is that you see the man, you directly in the eyes and be like, do not fuck with me. I'll run through you if I need to. And I love you. Right?
Yeah, holding the polarity, right?
Yeah. It's like, I will stand for this and my principles and my morals and who I am as a man, and anything. Don't disrupt it. Otherwise, there will be a battle. But I love you because you're my brother. But we all stand as men, right? And that was profound for me. And we're doing these exercises, and it started off with like the group learning it to the leader. Then the leader's like, okay, half and half. Everybody half face each other. It's like half of them are facing the other group, and you find somebody and you look them in the eye and you're just like, you let loose. And then, okay, everybody break up and start walking around. And then if a man pulls you in, just like energetically, you go face to face, and you're just like here, and you're just like at it. It's like yelling, just in their face. And I had this guy, he's probably the oldest man in the group, and also the shortest. And I was kind of slightly towering over him. And we went at it. And then suddenly I could see he wanted to get physical. And he's like, his two fingers, like he wanted to poke at me. And I was like, what the heck? My mind was like, what is he doing? I was like, should I just let loose a little bit? Let off a little bit? And I was like, no, you let loose. Go at him. And I did. And then he just cowered. And then all of a sudden, I could see he was just really uncomfortable, almost trembling. And then it was over, time for the next man. And you give the man a hug that you're just with, because there's love, and then you move on. So in the next workshop, he was in my group. There's 5 men, mattress, and each man lays down on the mattress. It's like, all right, begin. You close your eyes, you think of this man in front of you, loving touch, straight from the heart. And you just lay your hands on the man. Different parts of the man. There's 5 men, all doing it at the same time. That man starts erupting in tears, right? snotty nose and everything. And he's shaking. And then when we're finished, he gets up and one of the guys is like, whoa, that looked pretty dramatic for you, man. What was going on for you? He's like, man, he's like, my father. He's like, my father was this towering individual, could never do right by him. In fact, I was scared of him. He never once touched me with love. And I was like, damn, man. And I think that maybe might have been our altercation of just like what I represented for him.
Right.
But also just seeing what he went through. And then the very next day, that man was a completely different man. Stood taller, spoke louder. He was different. And I was just like, wow, I'm so lucky, because in those moments of that exercise, I looked around and just watching these 200 men loving touch to each other. And I was like, wow, man, I had that container from the get-go. From football, like scoring goals or just like having fun, and we'd be jumping on each other and playing. And just like,
Curious, how did that shape you?
How'd that shape me?
Yeah.
Well, I think that was a moment of clarity of how it did shape me, of just, that's a very good question. Just like, how did it shape me? And that's all I know, right? Versus that gave me a bit of contrast.
Sure.
Being in that group of like, there's so many men that don't have that.
Exactly. Right.
You know, that don't have that group of men to just like talk to as another man, or just have that loving touch as men, where it's just like sometimes people are just so like it's perverse and all this other stuff. Just like, it's just human beings. Like even in India, like guys holding other guys' hands, like brothers. Like, and then certain parts of the world be like, that's just inappropriate. It's just like, dude, it's like, we're men, we're human beings. Like, don't make it mean anything else.
Yeah. You know, I'm reminded by an experience when I was 12 years old. I was actually living in Canada at the time, and it was a school event. And I noticed that I put my arms around one of my best friends at the time. And it was just an expression of camaraderie, right? An expression of love at that time. And I noticed how he just absolutely pushed me away. And I noticed this experience of shock settle in for myself, because I didn't know what I did, right? But it was in that moment where I really started to discover, sharing touch with other men, that's wrong. That's something I shouldn't do, right? And I noticed how it was from that moment on, I kind of had this lens for myself of who should I be around other men, so I am going to be accepted by them, right? But then with that, I always held men at arm's length, right? And noticed that through that experience and other experiences, of course, as well, a lens of competition, comparison, and as well proving myself started kicking in. I'm curious, how was that relationship for you? And, you know, playing as well, like professional soccer. I'm curious.
Brother, that's hot shit right there, man. It's true, man. That's like, I think that was my window into yoga, like fully like stepping into the door. When I discovered that in a class of just, I guess I would call it the ego at that moment. And especially being raised in America, like the culture is like be number one. It's very like Lone Ranger kind of style.
Yep.
Be the hero. And if you look at all of our movies, it's all about the hero, right? It's
Exactly.
Like, and it's not about the collection of men and the people that come together. Now it's starting to change. I noticed the narrative's changing a little bit. Like we need each other.
Yep.
But that was almost like mostly my approach. Like I still had my team and I loved them, but there was something deep down that I didn't notice of just like, it's also just about me winning as well. Or me being better than the next man is a better way to put it, right? Rather than what's the best I can be, and then all these dudes are my inspiration.
Right.
Like, you're fucking amazing. You're fucking amazing. And there was a part of that, but like there was a subtlety that I didn't notice until years later because of the yoga. And so I felt like, in a way, like it dimmed my light, because when there'd be a certain player that was better than me, suddenly I was questioning myself.
Sure.
So then free self-expression or energy is not happening, right? Because now I'm being comparing myself to this other person. I got to be better than this other person, rather than just being within myself. Because I don't know what that individual is going through.
Right. It's this trap between inferiority, superiority, right?
Exactly.
And we balance back and forth, more than, less than.
Yep. And then create a story of just like, and it's made some great athletes, but really it's not sustainable.
Yep.
And there's so much further we can go, I believe, no matter what we're doing in performance or just living in life, if we can see that and then be inspired by others. And if we do get triggered, because we were just talking about the voice earlier, of just like our inner dialogue, if we do see that, then we can take a moment to just breathe and then choose something different. Be like, no, okay, this is here. So then there's something available because of this person that they're triggering with me. Can I see them as inspiration rather than, like jealousy, which is okay. It's okay. Okay to feel jealousy. Now, let's turn it into something. Let's use our alchemy and be like, inspiration. I'm jealous because you are living perhaps what I want. Now, how can we do that? And thank you for that. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you for that moment of like what I would call jealousy. And then just transform it and mutate it until it's something so powerful that you can't stop but just grow and evolve and become the best human being that you could possibly be.
That's alchemy, man.
Ooh, that's what I'm talking about, right? It's magic. It
Yeah.
still exists, man. We are alchemists, man. There's no joke about that. We're powerful human beings, and I feel like a lot of times we're selling ourselves short.
Absolutely.
With all this disbelief.
And I have to say, that's something I really always appreciated about you coming into your yoga classes. I always had this sense that you were someone who was all about lifting others up, and as well, like seeing the greatness in another human being, right? And so it was always beautiful to see that, because I could see my own lens of comparison continuously and still wanting to prove myself. And it still comes at times. And as you said, kind of learning to sit with that, and as well reframing that story from making that belief something about myself that I'm inadequate to a story of inspiration, feeling inspired by another and not necessarily needing to go down that path of insecurity and needing to prove myself or needing to one up somebody else, right? And so that to me is a really huge paradigm shift that I see a lot of men ultimately embarking on right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna throw this out there because I could be wrong, but
All right, let's go.
when because I don't really know these individuals and what they're going through and their entire history of what they've done. But for some reason the NBA came up for me. I think of Michael Jordan. I feel like that was like an older paradigm of like he just had to be the best, and the way he treated some of his fellow teammates and other people. So he would like if you watch the documentary The Last Dance, there are moments where he's just like talking down to other players. He's not really lifting them up all the time.
Okay, I wasn't
or
aware
he
of
would
that.
make something up about another opponent, like they were talking shit to access an energy in him that would just be like, I'm just gonna conquer you.
Yeah.
Which is cool, but it wasn't sustainable. And then also you could see like, there was a few friendships that just people just didn't appreciate that, talking today, of what they went through. And it was cool that they actually left that in the documentary, right? Because it wasn't all about making him like look like this clean basketball god of just like, And then we have like LeBron, and I see LeBron and Curry, and they just have like mad respect. Where Curry's just like, man, I used to look up to you, and now you're just like praising me versus like I got to be better than Curry. It's more of just like, bro, you're the fucking man. It's like, no, you're the fucking man. It's like that kind of thing. I feel like is present. In this next like step as being men.
Totally.
Where we're just lifting each other up, even though we're on different teams. And I'm just like, yes, like I feel like now that we're talking about this, like sports, it's reminding me sports is that container, right? And how can we bring that container if you don't play sports? And that's what I love about like men's circles that are coming together. Like I know some men are just like, men's circle, like I don't fucking need that. And it's just like, but we were talking about this earlier of just like, I think you used the word nutrient. And I was like, yeah, it should be part of the human diet. The man's diet, we need men's groups.
Yes.
You have sport if you're going to do it in sport. And if you don't have the sport, then have something that has this container for men to be amongst men.
Yeah. What's really intriguing is I reflected on this morning, actually. When I moved to Canada, I was 10 and I didn't know English. And the only way for me to connect with others was through sports, right? And I was a little chubby kid at that time. I was never interested in sports up until that time. But then as soon as I moved to that country, that was the only language through which I could share community, camaraderie with others, right? And that's something that really embarked me on that journey. But now as well, being involved in men's workspaces, having, I guess, left team sports for around a decade, I recognized, whoa, as you said, there was a nutrient that was missing in my life, right? And I was just reminded as well by a men's retreat I did earlier this year, 25 men coming together. And we really spoke about this paradigm of moving away from competition and actually sharing power with, right? Seeing each other both as powerful, right? And rising together and sharing that power with each other versus needing to use the power that we have to push somebody else down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it is ingrained in our society, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or so it seems. And I think it would be these little microcosms of community that are starting to happen that will just completely shift society from that lens of non-competition and just let's all like raise each other up to be the best that we could possibly be. Like, tell me your dreams, man. Tell me your challenges. Let me be there for you. You don't have to do it alone. You know, I love that, you know, and we learned so much about ourselves. Like, I just came away from a weekend. It wasn't a weekend, but it was 3 days and 2 nights with my circle. And we went up and we rented a place. It's a cool place. It's like a chalet, and it feels like my mind was tripping out. I was just like, "What? Am I in Austria or the Alps?" Like, and it really felt like that. You had the mountains out there and in the distance, and then this beautiful chalet that the 8 of us shared. And we had our usual like circle, which has a particular layout of sharing in terms of like how we're doing physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And then we always have like an opening to talk about things that might just be available, maybe a challenge that somebody's going through, and then we can all like work through it together for that individual and also see a reflection within ourselves. And then because of this, like, this is something that we want to do once a year. Let's have these trips away with just us. And it was the opportunity to like get to know the man more, right? And we decided that we would do what we called the hot seat. And you would sit in the chair and everybody would be surrounding you and be like, who are you? So we'd hear the history of them. And what are you up to? What do you want, you know, out of life? What are your dreams? Tell us everything. So now we really get to unravel who this person is, so that each time we sit in our usual weekly circle, there's a new potency to it. Like, oh, okay, do you remember when we were talking about your dreams? I don't know if that quite sits into it, does it? Like, no, you're right. And it's like, okay, well, what can we do? What kind of commitment can we create to ensure that you get everything you want out of life, right? And it's created this incredible space and camaraderie and relationship between us where it's just like, I see you, man.
I love hearing that. And it kind of as well reminds me of another nutrient that I personally believe is really important, which is challenging each other and as well as some level of accountability and sharpening each other through pressure, you know, like through that exercise, hot seat. I mean, I imagine, you know, there is a level of discomfort that's present. Like if I think about, you know, sitting in a chair, I don't know the layout, how it looked like, but it was like 10 guys just asking you questions. There is a level of pressure that may be present there, you know, of considering the answers that may want to come through, right? And I really believe that pressure, that challenge to a certain degree is really needed, right? And to really unveil a deeper truth that may be disguised under the superficialities, right? And at the same time, holding each other accountable and rising to who we know that man to be, you know? Yeah, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. There's an element of in the hot seat is that this person is sharing everything authentically of who they are. And I think that the challenge or what makes it hot is like, now you're truly expressing everything. So now they know. And that means the things that are holding me back from doing it, I might have to face because they're just going to remind me of it. And that could become challenging. Like, I think the common theme within it was action and self-belief, right? Just like, oh man, like what stops us from going out and getting what we want every day? Our expression. And it's usually those two things. Like, am I worthy of this? And just taking action after that, right? Or forget like trying to figure out why you're not worthy, but at least take action. And then that can transform, I'm not worthy, perhaps, you know, because there's always two sides to it. But that was the main thing. Like, we would never make somebody feel wrong.
Right.
But we want to know and then support. And if they feel like, hey, now's not the time, then we respect that completely.
Exactly.
Now's not the time.
Yeah.
And know that I'm here for you and I could just ask you again, but never making anybody feel wrong or ashamed or anything like that. It's just
Definitely.
more of like, I just want to know you. You're in the driver's seat and I'm just here for support.
Yeah. And I appreciate you as well sharing that nuance because, you know, when I speak about challenge, when I speak about accountability, that's the preface, that's the foundation that I'm thinking of or that we need to come through, you know, that element of love. And at the same time, recognizing if it doesn't serve that man right now to go into that, you know, step back, right? Yeah.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's such a joy, man. It really is to be so inspired to hear everybody's story and what they've gone through, I was just like, fuck, incredible people. And not just in my circle, but when I get to hear other people's stories, like right now I'm watching, I just started watching it last night, but it's the Netflix docu-series on tennis. I forgot what it's called.
Wouldn't know.
And what I love about these, like just like the guy that made the F1, which is a huge hit, made this tennis one, and you get to hear about people's like stories and like how they brought up and like the emotional and mental challenges that they're facing because of also their past. And I feel like, and then they have a team as well, but like when you have your team around you to lift you, to help you through that, it helps so much. And like no one feels like they're alone, because that's usually where a lot of challenges happen, where we can, you know, slip into depression and really believe that we are alone when there is somebody out there for us. You know, there's somebody that loves us. And if we can just,
I'm wondering how can we, if I can just jump in, I'm wondering how we can navigate that, you know, because that is something that I imagine so many men can relate to. This idea of feeling alone, or perhaps as well holding on to this narrative that I need to have it figured out, or I need to go through this alone. How can we start opening up a new doorway, a new pathway towards, opening ourselves up to connection with other men, or just other people in general, I guess.
This is an interesting one, man, because I can only speak from my experience. And I had a wise friend that was going through depression and suicidal thoughts, and he really brought something to the conversation, because I've never actually experienced these things. And all he was asking for is like listening, just deeper listening. He's like, I don't need advice. I don't need you to tell me what to do. And I know people want to help, and they'll have all these things like, this will help, that will help. But all I need is to be heard. And that's just the beginning. I was like, you got it. And just listen and ask questions. And that was it. And that was the most powerful thing. So I think if someone's in my position and they want to support somebody that's going through these challenging times, then just offer the best listening ear. Yeah. Without listening.
Yeah.
And just ask questions if they need to be, or just hear them out. And just be in such privilege for that person to share such intimate things.
Right.
Because I feel like when we try and fix things, like one, we could push somebody away, or two, they feel judged and they go back into that cycle.
Totally.
You know, as a person going through it and perhaps looking to reach out, I wish I could give some advice, but I've never gone through it, so I don't know what kind of strength needs to be found. But I do want to just let everybody know, like, you're never alone. Like, there's somebody out there, and whatever strength that somebody has to tap into just to like find someone to speak to, that will listen. It's a profound healing, and according to my friend, like that's it really transformed him. And
speaking from my own experiences, because there were certain moments in my life where I definitely found myself in that position. What I found was, what was needed for me was to have a level of courage to just simply honor the experience that I was having, and simply be authentic about it and share about it, and be willing to just have that be the main purpose, to just communicate it. And it was so surprising to me how often I was met with open arms, and how often I was just embraced for who I was in that moment. It was those moments where I felt actually I was more welcomed from others, you know, because it was truly a moment where I authentically bared myself to others, you know, where I really shared myself with others. And of course, you know, we want to, like, there's a lot of nuance in this conversation, and I really believe it's important as well to really bear ourselves with people, you know, where we feel that there's a level of safety there that can actually receive us, as you say, are not making us wrong, or are not attempting to fix us, change us, trying to give us advice, right? But really somebody who can hold that capacity to just listen and be like, I'm gonna be here, and I'm gonna just honor your reality right now, right?
And do you remember like how you found that strength?
It's a good question, man. You know, I remember one incident when I was working as a paramedic. I remember during that time I was dealing with a lot of social anxiety. I had a really hard time speaking with other people, and it took me some time, but I was working with one of my colleagues who I was working with. Usually, in a shift as a paramedic, you'd work in pairs, right? And this guy, he just exuded this level of safety within him, right? And he just embraced me as I was, accepted me as I was, and he didn't see me as different from anybody else. And I think that embodiment, that container which he created, over time, it created a level of safety for me to express myself. And I remember how I just openly bared with him the challenges I was going through, and I was shaking. I was literally shaking. But I noticed the experience that I had once I came out of that, and the level of freedom that I felt, the level of lightness that I felt. And I think that is something that I was reminded by, that left a really strong imprint in me. The lightness that came on the other side of sharing myself. And like I said, there's nuance in that. We want to be in environments that feel safe to us, where we can do that. But I recognize that holding this in, keeping this to myself, at the end of the day, it has more severe consequences for me than actually just being authentic, right? And just being humble and just revealing myself.
Wow. That's incredible, man. I'm just watching the few things that you've shared with me about your life of like going to Canada, not knowing English, and perhaps having to deal with it then. And then again, as you're an older man and having that, what I feel like you said is like that spark of like, oh wait, I remember what it felt like then. So anytime it comes up, you go back to that spark of like, let me just share this, as much as challenging as it is to get onto the other side of it. Wow. Alex, you're tremendous, man. And now holding space for men and doing podcasts, which is all about talking and having conversations.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate it. And at the same time, it's interesting, right? Because it's still an edge, right? It's still an edge. I noticed that, actually, I'll just openly share this. Initially when we started this conversation, I noticed myself stumbling through my words. I was like, I was not fully in it yet, and it just took a moment for me. And I noticed that my stories were looping a little bit, right? Yeah. And it took me some time to really self-source and regulate myself. But at the end of the day, I recognize that I have a deeper capacity now to hold myself through these moments. And I'm not perfect. And I, in no ways, intend to leave some form of impression of perfection here. But ultimately, I recognize that the things I want to bring out, the things I want to share, that to me is just so much more important than how I may be perceived or how I may be seen by another.
That's beautiful, because it's like if we're reminded about the impact, I think that's a great fuel to like take us through, because you were asking earlier, does it stay with us, this inner dialogue? And it's like, well, perhaps it does, because it's been with you, it's been with me, but now the way we receive it is completely different, so that we can realize the impact, but also just continue to step into that discomfort, and tremendous gifts are on the other side.
Yeah, man. I want to segue a little bit, brother.
Do it. Segue. I love it.
One other nutrient that I really believe is incredibly essential for a lot of men is this tapping into awe and wonder and like a level of gratitude. And if there's one thing that I really consistently saw with you, was this ability to see life through the eyes of wonder, seeing life through the eyes of, this is just a beautiful playground, where we're here to play. I'm curious to hear, has that always been your outlook on life? And if not, what took you, like what needed to happen for you to get there?
This is such an interesting question, because I watch what flashes in my head as you're saying it. And I would say the majority of my life was through that lens. I don't know why it was. I really don't know why as a child. Maybe my parents gave me a great experience. But as I got older, there was times where perhaps I was, God, such a good question. Because I'm thinking of like now my soccer, and I remember I used to sit on the bench a lot. So it was so uncomfortable for my mom. She started yelling at the coach during a game. She's like, maybe you should just leave this team. And I was like, no, I'm fine. And it actually molded me in a tremendous way, where I became one of the best soccer players in the state. And we won championships with that very team. And after I left that team, I just exploded. But it was weird, because my interests changed as well, of just like who I want to be in the game. And I think a huge lens of perhaps gratitude, and that lens of seeing life in a certain way came from that. But then I remember the first time where I was just like, I was really down. And the lens I was looking through then, I was in university and I got a hold of one of my dad's books in his library by Alex Haley. It was called The Roots. It's all about, it's fiction, but also there's truth in it. And it was about the slave trade and Africans in America. And I was so pissed and angry. And it wasn't happening anymore during that time. But because I was reading it, I was in that lens so deeply. Like perhaps I'm quite sensitive to it. But I was looking through that lens quite often. I've just like seen everything mostly in that way, and I would carry this kernel of hate and anger inside of me. Even like I'm in practicing and my soccer and all these things, and I still felt this kernel of anger and sadness, and it took me a while to get through that. But I guess why I'm giving this contrast is like that's the last time I can remember the most challenging moment of keeping my eye on gratitude, because my mind was just deep in that book. Because the next time it came up was during the lockdown, where I was just like, one, we're in lockdown, and I felt like a lot of freedoms were missing, but perhaps maybe in a good cause, I don't know. But there was people that had good intentions, but also then, the whole Black Lives Matters thing as well. Just like that same thing, that same kernel of anger and sadness came up again. I'm just like, wow, we still treat each other like this? And there's like two things happening at the same time, and I just broke down. Like my son was just born then too, and I was just breaking down in just this deep sadness. And challenged to have this lens of gratitude. And luckily I had this brand new, beautiful miracle, my baby there. And that would just like kind of take me in and out of it as I was just riding these waves. So I feel like there's certain things, like there's a lot of deep sadness just talking about this around people hurting each other and misunderstanding each other and trying to get up on each other and everybody not having necessities of like food and shelter, and just that, it really makes me sad, man, and really angry of just like we have enough for everybody. And if I go too far down that rabbit hole, then I'll just be a miserable human being. And so I guess when I recognize that and I stop and look to where I really am, where I'm really at, and the things or people around me, then I'm just like, whoa, tremendous gratitude, for everybody. Like if I'm teaching a class, like people will hear me like thank them, and maybe some hear me, so maybe some don't, but I'm like, really, thank you for what you're doing in the world. Like you enrich my life so much, each and every one of you, but you don't notice, but you do, because life is pretty damn sweet, and it's because of everybody's co-creations, right? And if we keep that up, we're going to start to build the world that we want to see, and most people just want love and peace and connection. If we keep our minds on that, like, awesome. But it's those little things, like, I'm just like, wow, gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bali, thank you. My breath, thank you. My son, thank you. So I'm just like in this constant place where I don't know why and how, but it's like, it's always spinning in me.
As I hear you, what I'm reminded by, or what I'm bringing to perspective right now, is this tension between sitting with the pain of the world, I guess, and the sadness that may be present, may it be in our own personal experience, or may it be what's happening in the lives of others. And to a certain degree, we have to go there, perhaps because we need to honor our experience of what's alive. But then as well, it allows us to tap into, from my perspective, a quality of humanity. But at the same time, only being there, it will, ultimately lead to a level of heaviness, a level of depression, right? And so on the other end, we have that expression of gratitude that's available to us, where we can bring into perspective what it is that we do have, right? The things that are going right, the things that, we're continuously blessed by, right? And it's, to me, what I see is it's this dance between both, right? To a certain degree. And I guess finding a middle path, and at the same time having that ability to fluctuate between both whenever it's needed, right? The reason why I speak about it, the reason why I believe it's an important conversation, is because, I can speak from my own experience only, but, hearing as well, within other conversations I had with men, just the challenges of accessing gratitude, right? Because there's this continuous chase for more, there's this continuous exploration of what's missing, what I'm doing wrong, what I'm not doing enough of, right? And I have that same narrative inside myself, right? And then what I see for myself is gratitude looking life, looking at life through these states of awe and wonder, or like going into practices that allow me to access those states, they're essential, right? Otherwise, and I have to actively explore that. Otherwise, I'll continuously be stuck in that lens of, what do I still need to do? What's the path ahead, right? It doesn't really allow me to really settle into this moment right here.
Yeah, yeah. That's important, right? Is having practices of something that brings us back to the present moment to really evaluate where we truly are versus where our mind is designed to take us. It's just like, it's like, for me, it's like this incredible power that we're given, and we're still learning how to use this incredible power of being able to travel by our minds to past and future, and how it affects us in the present moment, and knowing what's illusion and no longer exists versus like, well, only this exists right now.
Yeah.
But there's some lessons, and here's like a possibility based on that, and learning this power of like us being able to create image within ourselves and use our mind. And yeah, I'm with you on that, Dance, as well, because, you know, talking about certain maybe goals or things that I want to achieve in life, and sometimes I can look and also be like, oh, but I'm not there yet. And looking at the things that I don't have versus looking at the things I do have, and knowing that one day I'll get there. And if I don't, it's okay too. You know, but being okay to dream and not making it mean anything. It doesn't mean I'm less valuable, which is usually what it comes down to. Like, I'm just not good enough. I'm just like, hey, there you are again. Let's have a conversation. Why don't you think you're, you know? It's like I would for a friend. Just like, I would lift him up. I'd be like, nah, come on, man. Do you see the eyes that I see you through? Just like, you're fucking incredible. You're a miracle. Which you literally are. Literally are. But yeah, man. I'm just like looking through the lens of like being a father and looking at my son of just like, it's just a whole nother understanding. It's literally a rite of passage. You know?
Tell me more about that.
Oh, bro. Because I can remember like being, you know, growing up and like becoming a man and thinking I was a man before I was a man. I guess that's kind of what the 20s is all about. And even the teens of like, I'm invincible and just like, I can't be touched. And then getting touched by whatever, sometimes close to death or whatever it could be. And then sitting in more in the seat of myself, because a lot of it was out of insecurities of just trying to prove something. And then just like, oh, there's nothing to prove. And a little bit more of that, at least for me in my 30s. And then, and really stepping into the courage of being honest and truthful, you know, with myself and with others, you know, again, because of the fear of either what people would think or, you know, which means it goes back to like being worthy. And then stepping into fatherhood is just like, whew, boy, like first is I've never experienced, and people will say this all the time. You're like, yeah, I get it. Intellectually, it cannot be understood. But suddenly in the depths of love that didn't know existed, to where it's just like, this child is my life. Like my life has suddenly become second because this life is more important. In fact, I would give my life without even a question, just in a snap. And so that puts me into a completely different realm of being, of like, full service. And still at times being like, keeping up with the full service of just like the demands of being a father and being challenged by that. And then the challenge, finding growth in that, if I can find it, you know, in these very few moments, but they exist. Like I really have to look at the truth of who I am with my child. And like, for instance, I think one of the latest challenges is like when he wants to be fully expressed and heard, but also I got things to do too. And it could be around like, he wants to play. It's like, but I got to do these serious things, you know? And being able to hold that, which is challenging sometimes because he can get angry about it. It's like, I don't feel heard, so he'll react.
Yeah.
He could scream. He may even try like to give me a slap on my arm because he's not happy about it. And usually I'll make it about myself first and then try and zoom out and be like, well, this isn't about me. It's about him and supporting him through these emotions. And who am I being where we can have harmony, right? And I think the way I was raised is like, the child's like beneath. It was just like, how dare you? I'm the father. You should just fear me. And I was like, I don't want to fear. I want to have harmony. But I feared my family, my father, you know? Because I'd either get yelled at or I'd be told to like, shut up, I'm the child. I'm like, well, why can't I do this? Because I said so, I'm your father. It's like, okay, but I don't quite get that. Can you just elaborate? It's like, I will not elaborate. So just like felt loss of freedom and boundaries, and just like, I'd like to recreate something. And so a lot of times the first trigger that comes up is the way I was treated versus like, I want to recreate. I want something different for us. And
How do you do that in those moments?
oh
Like,
my God,
that's
bro,
just-
I'm still working on it, man. Before I just came here, we had a moment. I was just like, oh man, like, how do we do this where we can have a space where like, just understand, like, if you need to express this emotion without trying to name it, this emotion of just like, that's uncomfortable and you feel like you need to lash out, how can I redirect it? And what's happening for me, I guess, is like this habit of saying no and don't, which is just dead ends. Right. And it stops energy, and energy has to go somewhere. So it's going to become reactive. And so I guess my practice is like really getting down with that language and my energy around his energy. Because if I was truly removed from it, not removed, if I was truly connected to it, then one, I wouldn't just stop the energy. Two, it wouldn't cause a reaction in me, because then I can truly see like, oh, my man's going through something and he doesn't feel heard. How can I do this? How can we just redirect it so that he feels like he's being heard? Then he can hear what I'm saying, because I'm actually agreeing with him most of the time. It's just like, not right now. And it's like, obviously he's like still learning the concept of time and things like that. But in these moments are the moments that he gets to learn how to alchemize his emotions, which is the energy, and where can he direct it and how? And if this is continually played out, then that's how he's going to express it. So how can I be, as the man that's been here on this planet for a little bit longer and in this body, or be like, hey, this is how I do it, and just somehow transmit it to him? Or it could be showing the gaps in me that I haven't got it down yet, so I can practice this. So then naturally, without even having to speak to him, it happens because he sees it in my energy field and my behavior. And I think that's really the key. And so not only is he my major reflection, but also it's like, I guess really stepping into my manhood as his father, and not dominate, because I don't want to master him. You know, I want to just have a really fulfilled relationship and feel like everybody's heard and loved. And that's my practice. You know, when I get it down pat, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
But it still happens. There's these moments, and I think they'll always happen. It's just like, what's the action versus reaction?
Yeah, what I'm hearing is just a level of ownership, first of all, you know, that there's things arising for you, a level of humility, recognizing, oh, okay, you know, where am I coming from old patterns, and where am I imposing something on him that that is not my place to do? And as well, a level of, I guess, attunement, sensitivity, deep listening of what does this moment ask of me, right? The no, the don't doesn't seem to work, right? Where does the energy want to flow, right? It does require that level of sensitivity, awareness, attunement.
Yeah, I kind of, you know, as I hear you repeat it back to me, it makes me think of the archetype of the king.
Yeah.
Right? And
Right.
It's just like
Absolutely.
there is such a way of like being a king and being respected and still moving things without the shadow of the king, which is like trying to force
The tyrant.
and manipulate.
Yeah. It's about creating, I mean, you know, the king archetype is ultimately about creating order, right? So when there's chaos in the child, how can we cultivate that level of order whilst at the same time honoring the child, you know, honoring life ultimately.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Spot on, man. Yeah. So it's a beautiful transition and rite of passage. And yeah, I've gotten tremendous growth from it.
What do you believe are some of the deepest lessons that you learned? Let's say 3 lessons.
Lessons. Well, that's number one. You know, we can just use the king archetype as the expression of that. And of course there's like deeper listening in that. Right. And then just coming back to love and affinity.
Yeah.
Like what's happening between us, because this is going to play out our entire relationship, whatever it could be. That's not harmony. So it's just like continually looking at like, where can we have more harmony? Where can I have more harmony? You know, who can I be? Right. That he just looks to, because that's all he's doing is looking to me. Right. So then everything is like a reflection of me. You know, and I truly believe that. And also it's like, why did he choose? I also like to play with this. Like, I love to play with the thoughts that we chose our family.
Yeah.
It's like, well, why did he choose me? And if I chose my parents, then why did I choose them?
Yeah.
And I noticed, like, and some of the people that I talk to when we have this type of conversation, it was just like, usually there's some sort of antidote into family karma that can bring more harmony, and that the child sees it because the child's been in it the entire life of just watching from the outside. And naturally, like, we want harmony. So it's like, okay, well, how can I provide harmony to my family? And it's like Sage is my son. He's going to be the same of like, where's the imbalance, and I want to bring it, right? And I'm like, okay, well, if that is true, then how can I be of service in terms of this harmony? So then he can play out something else. And yeah, I think those would be like my top three.
Yeah, beautiful, brother. Yeah, I'd have one last question if you're available to it.
Yeah.
And then we'd have to wind down. But something I'm really intrigued about is I'm wondering how having a child, having a son, I'm wondering, what I'm really curious about is if it brought more perspective to your own childhood, to you growing up and seeing, I guess, maybe your own childhood through him. You know, what is it like truly like seeing him being a young boy on the outside, right, and being a father. I'm wondering if that unraveled some stuff for you.
Oh, absolutely. I think it does in everybody, right? Like,
Right.
if I was to ask my father or look at his past, he'd be like, I didn't love to live like that, so therefore I'm going to do this for my son, which is what he did, because he had a father that was an alcoholic and never around. So he's like, what is he? Well, he's there all the time and doesn't touch a drop of alcohol because that was his experience of like, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And then so therefore in mine, I'm just like, well, I would have loved more time, which is what I give my son, as much time as possible by being lucky enough to design a life where I don't have to work a tremendous amount of hours, but I can spend more quality time with him. And also being heard. Like, I didn't feel like I was always heard. I was always like shut down, and how can I provide that for him? And so that'd be my experience, where it's just like those things are reminded, but also they've always been there.
Yeah.
And so it's like also looking back at the family karma, just like what are the challenges of the family been, and I'd like to stop that right now, right? And some of that is about listening of like, I'm not going to call that person anymore because of whatever. And there's been lots of that in both sides of my family. I'm just like, well, I want to be in connection whether somebody calls me or not, and try not to make it mean anything, because usually everybody just wants to be connected. So yeah, and my son just brings that up all over again, because I'm about to have another child in December.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, we're gonna take
Congratulations,
Thanks,
my friend.
man. Yes, man. So I'm excited about that, to see what little bean comes through, and the dynamic of big bro, Seiji, which he's very excited about at the age of 3. Oh my God, just like, kids are fucking amazing, man. It just blows my mind all the time. I'm just like, what? How do you know all this already? Or how do you there's so many surprises. But it's one of the biggest and tremendous gifts I've ever had.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about timing, right? Different seasons, and this is definitely the season of just like supporting and being with my children
Totally.
and others,
Yeah.
other friends' children's, and having
Yeah.
these dreams of like bringing us all together. Like in some of my circles, including the men's circle, it's just like this dream of raising our children together, like going out and getting a plot of land and building our houses in such a way that our kids can just run out of the house and be amongst, you know.
Sign me up for that.
Yo, I'm telling you, man. And it's like it's starting with the circle of men of just like we take reins on it. It's like, let's make this dream happen and support like our family, our ladies, our children, and vice versa. But I feel like there's a huge structure in like doing it men amongst men, and having this, because I've been listening to some stuff lately, including friends, and it's like this paradigm of like everything in the Western world, majority is like it's all about separation.
Yep.
Right. And so it's like you move out of your house and you're away from your family, and everybody's got their own thing going on, including mortgages and just ways of life. And it's like, how can we bring that back together where it's like the elders are there, you know, the men are amongst men, but also like the women are amongst women, and then we're just like intertwining, our children are playing, and we come back to that, like that village, you know, in our new way. And I think that's so needed right now.
Agreed.
And then all the things we talk about in terms of like separating or feeling alone, it starts to diminish. Because I think it's just the very design of the system.
Yeah.
So,
Mark, this was an epic conversation.
Yeah,
Such a
Alex.
rich conversation. I really loved it. And I really felt like we went into some juicy topics.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really appreciate your
I
time.
appreciate you, man. I
Yeah.
appreciate you for the stand you've made for like your life. And in return, it's like a stand for all of our lives as well. And facing all of your challenges, that I got to learn new things about you and your journey and why you are the man you are today. So much respect, and I see you, man.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
I'll reflect that back.
Thank you, brother.
It's received.
Nice.
Before we come to a close, I would just love to offer one last question, just directed towards the listeners. I'm curious to hear, what is one message that you would love the men out here to know, like the men who are perhaps listening to this podcast? I know I'm leaving it quite open, but I'm curious if something wants to come through that wants to be shared.
I guess if there's any message, is like, is the courage to really step into your truth and who you are and express that, and be careful of hiding, because if you were to ask that question, what's more courageous, hiding something or expressing it, then I feel like there's a lot of space for possibilities within that. So that'd be like an affirmation or a question that I would ask.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me in Bali, or you can find me online at Yoga Glow. I teach yoga classes on there, as well as you can find me on Instagram at Marc, M-A-R-C, Laws, L-A-W-S, I, for Marc Laws II, named after my father. That's a whole other story we didn't get into today, but lots of love for my pops. That's how you can find me.
Beautiful. Yeah, hopefully we'll have an opportunity of that for the next time. All right, brother.
All right, my man.
Thank you again so much.
Pleasure.
For all the listeners. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, much love. Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.